Hello, Kurt. Welcome to the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Simon.
My pleasure indeed. Appreciate you making the time. Um, I've had a lot of guests on this show, Kurt. It's, we've seen such a range of guests, people who've sort of started, grown, sold, got back on that merry-go-round, did it again, did it for themselves, did it for other people. And that's kind of what I loved about you when I was having a look at your profile is that you've come at this from multiple angles. You've done it yourself, you've worked with others, you've bought, you've sold, you've grown. So it sounds like you're the perfect guest for this podcast.
I hope so. For nothing else, I love what you're trying to do with the podcast about share those stories for others. I like to tell people that I'm mentoring, I'm like, I've failed so many times, most people would crawl under a table and die. And it's like, if anything, if we can share just one or two stories that help somebody not have to go through some of those like turmoils, like that's life-changing for them and their families.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe we could kick off. Like, what got you into, like, what was your first sort of earliest memories of being an entrepreneur or sort of leaning into entrepreneurialism? Like, was there any sort of sparking moment, some motivation, anything like that?
The sparking motivation was actually, I was actually 9 or 10, and my dad worked for Bell Labs, or what Bell came out of Bell Labs, the Apple of the day. And he took me in and I solved some math problems. And I got this check, and we got to go to the store and buy anything that I wanted. I'm like, I still remember, like, why am I being able to go to like Toys R Us in the day and buy anything I want? He was like, because you solved something that others haven't been able to, and if we would pay a consultant for this, we should pay you. And so he did that for me, and I was like, wait a second, if you solve problems, people give you money. And I didn't. You have no concept of what that really means, but that's my first kind of like real seed. But then I got thrust into entrepreneurship when I was 14, had to form 2 LLCs because I was going to have to file so many taxes in the States because I had friends working for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I love that. You're not old enough to drink. You're not old enough to drive, but you're old enough to have a company, employ people, and pay taxes.
Yes. Oh, the government wants their share.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's cool. So, I know you've been involved in a few different sort of ventures there. It's, I was seeing actually your profile. Was it Clear Vision? Tell us a little bit about that business.
Yeah, that was actually just like a glorified web hosting company that I built up because when the internet was starting, I was really good at sales, and so if you can do sales and operations, you can just print money. And so I was working on a master's degree, and like literally, once you get one client in a small town, college town, I was able to just go to accountants and lawyers and back and forth and be like, hey, I just sold them a website. You need to be online, and hosting goes along with that. Maintenance goes along with it. And very quickly, I ended up realizing this is not something I really want to do. So I ended up basically just outsourcing the hosting bit of it, which later ended up being the place I ended up selling that company to. For all the hosting and maintenance for it. Did not even think about that at the time. So looking back, I got an okay deal, but I wasn't planning for it. It kind of just fell into my lap.
Yeah. Interesting. It's such a. I'm always curious about how people get into businesses, but then over time, like our perceptions evolve, right? Like you've done startups, you've done that side of things, but as we know you've done a lot of transactions as well. If you were to go back in time to your young sort of teenage self who's thinking about getting into business and you had all the options open, would you tell them to look at startups? Would you tell them to try to buy a business? Like if you're starting again, do you have a view on buy versus build?
I think it really depends on the person. For me personally, if I could go back and tell myself something, it would be do not start like the startup on the more brick and mortar, the selling those websites. That was actually easy. Doing the technology startups was really hard for me. I raised a bunch of money, I put things in, but it was actually one of my mentors who's now passed, Reggie Bradford, who helped counsel me through. He was mentoring me, and I'm like, I'm just miserable. Like we're making good money. Recurring revenue and technology is always great. And I'm like, why am I so painful? And he was like, because you're a scaler. This 0 to 1 crap, people are really good at that and love it. He was like, but Kurt, you're the guy that comes in and takes something that's 10 million, 100 million and 100X's it. That's what you like doing. That's what you're good at. He was like, finding product market fit early on, that with no customers, he was like, I'm watching you. I hurt for you. And he actually counseled me out of getting out of it. And so if I could go back and tell myself that, it would have been like, look, some people love startups. It's the fun thing to do. College dropout, go do it. But like, no, like that's good for some people. It wasn't good for me. And I didn't know myself well enough. I was looking for pride, being like, I want to be that founder that started the $100 million company. And instead, that's just not what I'm good at. I'm that operator scaler.
Yeah, I think that's a really great insight there, is having enough kind of emotional intelligence to know your strengths, know your weaknesses, know what you're good at and what you're not necessarily good at. It's a funny one. And I've seen this lots of times the other way around, where I've met the guy or girl who was fabulous at whatever it was they did, and they would build the business to a certain point and then just find themselves butting their head on the ceiling, and they just didn't know how to push through to that next level. And I've had a number of times in my life, my career, running Exit Advisory Group, where on occasions you get the founder with that much emotional intelligence who says, Simon, I'm actually at the limit of my capabilities. I'm not the guy to take this company to the next level. It's huge opportunity. That's just not my skill set. And, I think it takes a lot of humility to be able to put your hand up and actually say, my business could probably do better in somebody else's hands or with somebody else at the helm.
Yeah, no, I mean, sometimes we can get coaching, and I think that'll move us through it. But it's for me, I'm a big believer in making sure that what I'm doing suits me and suits my family long term. And so even if it's painful and I could get coaching through it, is that the best use of my time and my resources? Like, I've been stewarded not just money, but time and skills. And it's like all of those things matter. And so, maybe I could get coaching to go through this certain place, but it's not what I'm good at, as opposed to you give me something that I can scale. And I mean, man, my 10 hours a week may be more valuable than somebody's 100 hours a week. And so putting in that 40, 50 hours, it's a completely different scale for them. And some cases you can coach that, some cases you can't. Like, I've also been told by some people that it's like there's this muscle memory you get from hypergrowth. I think there's the same muscle memory you get from having found that initial product market fit and getting to that $1 million, $5 million of recurring revenue. That they're different, muscle memories, and it's hard to work between those two sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do like the question though. Hey, I probably could learn that, but should I? Is that actually the smartest use of myself and my resource? So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, my wife and I, we've been married about 10 years now, almost 11. And so we've been really big on, I've always been big on stewarding my money. And a lot of us kind of do think that way. Where should we give and donate and things? But I had a mentor that came alongside me and was like, money's good. But $100,000 check from this person or you is still $100,000. Your time is completely different. And he was like, so it was like, should you be going and digging ditches, in a third world country? Maybe if that's where your heart calls you for something. He was like, but the same week you could do doing that, if you donated it to something more knowledge work with the same entity, what would that do for them? And so my wife and I, we fail at this, but we try to do look backs, and we plan forward about how do we steward our time and our skills the same way that we do our the money that we've been given.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. Yeah,
and it applies to business as much as it does off hours. So,
yeah. I mean, you got to use. It's an interesting one. I was talking to my son the other day about business, and you tapped on this at the very beginning of this podcast. This episode was solve a problem, you can get paid. And I was extrapolating that a little further for my son and saying how, fundamentally business is actually about allocation of resources. Yeah. How do you solve problems with limited resources? Because you can't solve every problem yourself. And so, how do you go about doing this? And where is it smart to have other people involved with you? And for what it's worth, my two sons, they're 14 and 16. They have a little mini power washing business. So they go around. One son is the extrovert. He cold calls and knocks on the doors. Yep. My other son's really technical and really good at doing the work and the detail. And so, they come back here and they're at 16 and 14 and they're making sort of $35, $40 an hour. And their mates who go and work in the local chicken shop are making sort of $10 an hour. And they're like, why don't you come and get a job? And they're like, well, hang on. I make a lot more over here. So, but just talking about how to solve that. Now my youngest son is even talking about it. Dad, maybe I should get some of my friends to come and work for me. I'm like, oh yeah, here we go. So yeah. Anyway,
that was part of the business I sold. The first business I sold when I went to college was I started with lawn care, and then what do you do as bolt-on services? I realized I could add on power washing and pressure washing.
Yeah, totally.
But it was the same. Totally. It was the same thing, and so I went to my friends and was like, "Look, like I can pay. What are you earning down at McDonald's, or what are you earning somewhere else?" And I'm like, "I can double that right now. I'll pay for the next week."
Yeah. Nice. Kurt, I'm interested to unpack some of your experience here. We've had a lot of founders, and you've been a founder yourself. But and so I guess we've had a lot of this talk of how do we start something and build it to a point where it's saleable. But we do get a lot of people, listeners, even people in my world, who are really fascinated with this, as you put it, sort of that, how do I take it from the 10 million and really 10x this thing? How do we scale at a really huge level? And I'm curious to get your sort of thoughts around this, because you've been involved around it enough. But like, are there some key elements that you see a business must have? They're the critical ingredients to scale from X to Y.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the main things it's a mentality, it's a way of thinking, and so you don't have to always have the like. I'm not a big fan of formal training and education. By all means, college, university are great, but I do find software engineers, mechanical engineers, applied mathematicians, trained lawyers that don't want to be a lawyer. It's the level, it's the type of granular thinking that all of those disciplines have at formal education that I find that's actually, you don't have to be trained that way, but that's what the business has to have: one or two senior leaders. It doesn't always have to be the top person. I'm a big fan of that big visionary mad scientist up top, but the person running things has to have that level of being able to be kind of, a jack of all trades. There's a book out there now called Range, where it's like, hey, you don't just focus on one thing. You need to be good at a whole bunch of things. But it's that way to be able to granular things. I mean, I've been really good at marketing and sales, not because I'm creative and coming up with new ideas. I steal people's ideas or take an idea from somebody on the team, but I can apply it because I've been a software engineer. I've been that hacker that's gone out and done things. And that's the level of thinking that it takes, the type of thinking. So you can coach through that a lot of times, but if you don't have that yourself, if you're that mad scientist, the EOS, the Entrepreneur Operating System, it's defined for that founder who says, look, you've got to that $1 million, $5 million, but you don't think in processes. You're always hot for the next thing. You need to go get that man or woman that can actually run the daily shop.
Yeah. That makes sense. It's an interesting one. One of the things we talk a lot about in our team is, when we're hiring, what are some of the attributes that you want? Because you don't have to be a CEO or a COO or one of these senior people to, they don't have a monopoly on good thinking and great ideas, right? Like anybody can learn to think like this, or for some people it comes naturally. But we boil down so much of what we do, when we're recruiting, say, well, what are the absolute couple of one or two or, few attributes that we really, really value? And as a team, the one thing that we actually came down to was curiosity of mind.
Yep.
So you're curious. You want to know how things work. You want to know, curiosity leads you to thinking about things in different ways. So curiosity was the first thing, but then enough initiative, motivation, ambition, whatever you want to call it, to actually do something about it, right? To go and explore it. And I kind of hear that message resonating almost in what you're saying here, that you've got to be able to think laterally and know how to hustle and make things move.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on everything you said. I mean, I have some of those things written out there, and they're on my website. They're in every company I work for. Like, that last one you mentioned, for me, I verbalize that as bias towards action. Like, hey, if there's a problem, you're not going to wait to run it by me. If anything, you'd rather make the wrong decision than wait an extra day or two, some cases, because that's one of the things I look for. Another one I would add to that list is, and it comes up in the first interview for anybody I have, is anybody we're hiring. Are they okay with healthy conflict? Today, so many people are scared of conflict. There's toxic conflict, but I would much rather have somebody that would bring up a problem when it's small or early My wife and I talk about it pre-fighting. Hey, let's talk about this subject now when our son, our son's 4 and not when he's 12, so that we can work towards something. And we've already made the decision beforehand. And so I think that applies for work as well, but it's healthy conflict. And it's like, people need to be able to also ask, like, some people know what that means. I'm really okay if people have to ask, and then they either self-select out or they go, oh, that's awesome, I would love to work in that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Being willing to actually engage and have that conversation before you're in the heat of the moment and the emotions are flying, and it's, people have already shut off the logical part of their brain, right?
Yeah, and I don't always get that right. I mean, I had an issue like towards in Q3 last year where I had a peer of mine where I had not addressed something for a couple of months, and it just kept bubbling up. And finally, like, I was that person that was just like this, and I didn't realize it. And I'm like, I had to go back to him. I'm like, I've been kind of leaking out toxicity without meaning to. This was why. I'd like, can we come back and resolve that and kind of redo a couple of those conversations we had? But all of those points you mentioned, it matters for scaling, and you're right, for people that are trying to figure out how to get to the next level. But I don't think most people realize that it matters for sale. I mean, there are times where people are just doing an asset purchase, and then they're wanting whatever book of business you have or the technology you have. But in most cases, especially like even like where I've gone along with the companies and stuff, like the best acquisition I've ever done was actually, the technology was great, but we were acquiring the leadership team. I joked later, it was a company called Traffic.com. It was about $170 million acquisition in like 2006. We kind of joked later that Chris Rothy and his team actually acquired us in a way. Like, we had this huge part of the business that was data, but after about 2 years, Chris and his team ended up running pretty much all software, all APIs, anything that wasn't pure data in the company. And it's because, like, some of us saw by wanting to put together that deal, they were as valuable as the technology was.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. Talking about acquisitions, you've obviously done a lot of acquisitions. What does that look like for you guys? Can you talk us through it? I mean, and the reason I'm interested in this is I'm starting to see more and more this concept of growth via acquisition is no longer just the playground of the large corporates and the big PE firms. It actually seems to be going downstream into the, not just even the lower, now we're into the lower middle market, not just the mid market, right? Where people are starting to say, well, hang on a minute, this is a smart way for me to potentially grow. So can you talk us through a little bit around, some of the acquisitions you've done? I mean, what do you look for in a good acquisition?
Opportunity and price are clearly some of the big things. I mean, I literally have an email to respond to right now on 2 potential leads to some deals that a friend has sent me, and she's like, "Hey, these 2 things are on the block, or will be if you're interested." And I mean, but that's becoming from relationships there, and so some cases it is opportunity where you mentioned sometimes somebody's going, "Oh shit, I want out." But other cases, like, at least in one of these, I do know the company that they're at that inflection point where they can't get past it, and they know to get to the vision that they're wanting to, they need a certain type of home, and so that's why they kind of step forward on that. And so I may know a couple of those places to place them. That's often where I'm kind of seeing is, like you said, like some cases I'm looking for something. I'm almost never doing an asset sale myself. It's got to be something that's going to have that huge growth. But you're right on the downsizing. I know a really senior marketing executive that just left a great job and bought a operating franchise in California, like a baller of an executive, and is going down the other direction. And it's like, I'm seeing a lot more of that nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. I had a guest on the show yesterday who is doing microtransactions. We're talking 5 to 6 figure deals. The lowest is sort of about 50K up to a couple of $100K. And she's just buying small little e-com businesses and bolting them together and then cross-pollinating them. And, for somebody who lives in the southern island of New Zealand and has a wonderful life, and she just goes, look, can make 7 figures a year, and I don't have to work very hard, and I'm, and the businesses pay themselves off, and it's getting right down into this kind of area of the market I'm seeing. But yeah, it's fascinating, and I think people, particularly after COVID, a lot of people are questioning their life and where they're going and what they're doing and how they spend their time. And hey, is there a better way than the traditional route of just being an employee? So I think that's been fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of, at least what I'm seeing in some of my peer group are, like I'm not sure there's a dollar figure that would make me go back into an office. Like I love people, I want to hang around people. I could probably go into an office 1 to 2 days a week, but it's like we have a mountain property, and I love my wife. Like I got to see my kids like on 3 or 4 breaks today. So I think a lot of people are looking at that like, hey, yeah, having the multi-$100 million exit would be nice, but if I can clear 7 figures a day, or sorry, 7 figures a year, like, and I can work from home or work from wherever, like that's good, not just for me, but especially on the other side of like, I'm a big believer of like, I'm not just a steward of my family, but the people that I employ and work with me. And so like, hey, I'd like to do for everybody what I can do for 1 or 12. But running running an e-com business, bolting things together allows you to change certain people's lives. And great, maybe you're not employing 20,000 people. Okay, you've changed 20 people's lives, and you have the type of life that you and your family want.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's regular listeners to this show will have heard me say this many times, but I'm one of these people that doesn't. I don't believe we're born to do business. You're born to live your life. Right. And really, you should structure your business to deliver on whatever that kind of life is that you want. So, really, when people talk to me about growing and exiting and all this sort of stuff, I'm always just sort of coming back to the personal side and saying, well, what's important to you? Like, how do you want to spend your time? Like, what do you actually want from this journey? And, you can build businesses to do anything you like. But if you can't get clear on that part, well, you're probably going to end up in the wrong location.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, that's like, I look back where it's like, I've been on vacation and somebody sees me on, which is kind of rare because I have that lifestyle that you're talking about. And it's like, I was up this morning at my laptop at 5:05 a.m. working on writing for my own site, because I do enjoy writing and sharing some of my stories and journey, but I love what I do from a work perspective. And so I also love hiking with my son, or driving around with him on a skid steer. And so it's like, I will do those things, but like, you couldn't convince me to go do, a job that's, not enjoyable now. And so it's like, I'm a firm believer in like, I'm also not like hey, just follow what you love to do. I mean, follow what you love to do that you'll get paid for, because it allows you to do that lifestyle that you're talking about. I just happen to be I happen to really enjoy what I'm really good at, which is helping people grow businesses.
Yep. No, that's cool. Let me circle back a minute to some of the acquisitions you've done. We're talking about what sort of makes a good deal and stuff like that. And I agree with you, look, opportunity, price. But then again, there's lots of opportunities out there that aren't necessarily a fit. You know what I mean? Like, you're a tech company. You're not going to go buy a landscaping business, right? So despite the fact that it makes great profits. I'm just curious, as a guy who's led deals and led that buy-side transaction, do you typically have things that, requirements in a deal, like they have to be over a certain size, or they have to contribute a certain percentage to revenue or EBITDA, or I don't know, like I guess there could be 100 different metrics and different, maybe for all different buyers, but are there trends or things that you typically look for or need to meet as a corporate buyer?
At different companies, yes. Especially, so I was with a company called Navtech, became Here Technologies, like anything that uses map data, spatial data. We think about Google Maps, this company's so much larger than that. And so from a mapping perspective, and so we were typically looking for, we were the 800-pound gorilla. There was not a growth opportunity. We were looking for gaps in our product offering, gaps in technology. So like traffic.com, we didn't have real-time sourcing of stuff. They kind of gave us some of that. So, in that case, it wasn't like EBITDA was just more of, hey, were we not going to lose a large amount of money going into it? It had to fit something that was already on our roadmap, an identified gap. And a lot of times, like some of those opportunities that came through, I mean, a dozen of them that came through was because we had shared with peers things that were on our roadmap that we knew we weren't good at, or we knew we needed to figure out. And so that others like you would have come to us and said, hey, you said you were looking for a company like this. I happen to have one now. because there's no way, I think, on a corporate side that you can go out and source all the deals yourselves. It comes from relationships, and it comes from exposing a little transparently. Here's what we're trying to figure out. At least where I've been. We've done a couple of acquisitions. I was at a company we sold to Oracle, social media management. In that case, I did a small deal that was, $1 million kind of acquisition price because we were looking for growth opportunities. You have a product that I can go sell to all of my customers. Let's do this deal as quickly as we can. And so, in that case, but that was much more of almost an asset sale at that point. So
that's interesting. That sounds a little bit like Rod Drury, who's the founder of Xero, the accounting software. His first company was Aftermail, big mail archiving business, solution. Sold it to 2 Fortune 500 companies, and then basically sold it to somebody else and said, well, look, you've got the other 498 Fortune 500 companies as clients. Why don't you just take this and roll it out? And so I think he sold that. It was a 2 million turnover company, and he sold it for about 15 mil, and then that's the money that went into starting Xero and building that. So, which I think at latest measurements is billions and billions and billions of, I think it was 80 bill or something crazy. Anyway, it's huge. But I love that idea. And I think just to pick up on what you were saying there about understanding the problem in your own kind of business or the gap that you're trying to solve, is there an opportunity, do you think, here for entrepreneurs who are out there, maybe with the smaller business, to kind of try to reverse engineer that and say, well, look, if I really want to build a company for value and build it for a big exit, how do I find out what problems these bigger companies are having? How do I build to solve problems? Is that possible, do you think?
I think it is. It also goes to that being kind of humbleness of what are you building? I find too many small, especially technology companies, they're trying to build a business on what's really a feature versus a problem. Yep. There's not a long-term opportunity for you there. Somebody's going to squash you in that. That's different than finding something that's a problem for the same type of customer and then going out and selling. The company I mentioned was named Vitry that we ended up selling to Oracle. Before, when we were raising our next round that ended up turning into a sale, we had not intended it to be at that time. We'd raised about $32 million. We knew a problem we had. That was social media management when it started. There was Hootsuite, which most of us have used, something like that, and 2 big enterprise players, and we were one of those. So what did the CEO and I do? We're flying out to Utah, where Adobe was based for all their digital products, figuring out what the strategic deal was for them, because they had Adobe Analytics and all those ad platforms, and they had nothing that was useful in social. They had a failed acquisition. So we were starting at that point. Now we're a bigger company, having raised 30 plus million, but we weren't scared to reach out to companies because we knew they were having the build versus buy discussions already. So we might as well start talking with them in Salesforce, and it ended up being Oracle, and being like, hey, how can we work together to do some cross-selling now? Hey, we might be raising a little money. Do you want to kind of come into that? Because that we all know that when you start to bring on a strategic like that, it's so that they can make sure that they're buying a seat at the table when there's actually a game to be played.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You mentioned like challenges and deals, but I'm curious, with all the acquisitions you've done, you must have been involved in or seen deals that haven't gone through for whatever reason. And I've been on the sell side quite often. I'm always saying to clients, oh, they get excited. Oh, we had an offer. I'm like, seriously, the work hasn't started yet.
Right.
The work starts when we get into due diligence, and we're going to pull everything apart. And, as I keep saying, everything comes out in due diligence. If you've got skeletons, you need to tell me. But I'm just curious, have you seen deals fail in your journey? And have there been any kind of trends or obvious, reasons why these sort of things tend to fail or not go through?
Yeah. I mean, I have a couple of stories where it's like we don't have to get into the detail, but where, to your point, like, hey, a deal is not done until not even have things been signed, but things have been signed and money transferred. I mean, I've seen them all break apart like at both of those places before. But those have, from my experience, have been unexpected. Something has come up that's a black swan kind of event for one of the companies usually. It often is, to your point, about either skeletons that came out or something that wasn't a skeleton, but it was held back And so
Mm.
rather than being transparent, brought to the deal, I'm a big fan of, hey, if you know something's going to come up, if you know there's going to be a problem or a potential problem, you should raise it on the table and bring it up as quickly as possible. Because
Yes.
when it's later, it's going to feel weightier when people feel like they're pot committed to the deal, and then they find out, hey, we might lose this big customer. Look, there was no way you were going to get past that if you lost the customer or not. Bring it up ahead of time. You can build it in contingencies, and people can decide early on. And then it's not a big deal. Like, things like that happen all the time. I just find founders are so concerned sometimes about like sharing some of their cards. And it's like, look, to your point, these things are all going to come out. And so unless you're selling the company and stepping away, which is very rare with earnouts, but much less, especially if you're joining the things, these are going to be your new coworkers. Like, do you want to set a foundation where they feel like they can't trust you because something came out? Even though it wasn't a big deal, they would have been like, well, why didn't you tell me that, Simon? Like, we could have worked through that. And people just are scared. And I mean, I get through that myself as well. I mean, I sent a text yesterday to a friend, and I'm like, not being scared, but I'm more like, I'm going through this and I shouldn't. And he just kind of wrote back and he was like, dude, you're focusing on the wrong thing. Like, this is a mind game for you. So I think sometimes it is having somebody like you that's alongside to be able to say, tell me about the skeletons. Tell me what you're most scared of in this deal. And I'll help you. I'll coach you through whether or not not what, even when, but how we bring out the deal.
Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah. And the other kind of nuance that I've seen to this, which is interesting, is sometimes I find that founders don't understand the perceived risk in their business. I liken it a little bit to flying, actually. Like, if you're going to get on a plane and you are terrified of flying, it doesn't really matter what anybody says to you. You're going to be scared of that trip. You're going to perceive risk on that flight far differently than, say, the pilot who's up the front. Now, the actual risk from a impartial perspective is absolutely the same for both people. But I think with founders and business owners who've been around particularly a long time, even if they acquired the business, they've been running the company for 20 years, there'll be certain risks in their business that they just don't even see as an issue because it's never propped up. We've never had a plane crash. It doesn't mean the plane can't crash, but it's never happened. So I don't worry about that, and it's not really an issue. Whereas somebody new coming in goes, hang on a minute, like there is actual risk here. And I think the problem, and what I end up coaching a lot of people to, is don't gloss over that or be dismissive of that. Right. Like, you've got to listen to what they're saying, appreciate that they've got a fear of flying here, and this is, you need to couch this in different terms. And so, once again, buyer and seller come together, build trust in a shorter period of time, right? That means actually being open to listening and talking. And I think a lot of those
difficult conversations and understanding that not everybody's going to want to do a deal, and that's okay. I mean, I stepped out of working with a company because I was advising the way that the way that you do, and I found out that one of the founders had actually written a foundational amount of the code when he was still under an IP assignment from another large company. And he didn't let anybody else know that. And so when I found out, like, as soon as I heard a wind of it, I approached him that day and said, is this true? Because we need to have a chat. And found out it was true. And I'm like, so here's your options. We can go back to the big company and get you a release, and it's probably going to cost you a lot of money. You can sit on it and run the gambit, but I'm out at that point. Like, this is an ethical issue at this point. And either way, you're going to true up to your investors that have come up because they need to know what's now happening with their money. And most of the investors decided to say they run the gamble that nobody would find out about it. I just personally couldn't do that. I said, that's fine. So, I mean, I did my part of coaching through, this has to come transparent enough for the other people that have equity to decide what they want to do. I just can't be a part of that decision if y'all choose to make it. And they did. And I don't fault them for making their decision. It's just not a decision that ethically I could be part of.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about, I guess, sort of deal structure and sort of transitions. I think for a lot of business owners out there, when they think about exiting, once again, I mean, they run the race and think that they've almost done when they've got an offer. It's like I've had people ring me up and say, "Oh, look, I've got an offer on the table. Like, you should cut your fees in half or to a quarter because we've already got a buyer." I'm like, "Oh my goodness, you've done like 0.01% of the work. You've just happened to fall into somebody's giving you an offer. The work, there's so much more involved." And you extrapolate this sense of where is the finish line. And I think a lot of business owners then struggle with the idea of having to hang around after the deal, having an earn-out, having to culturally fit into other companies, having a boss all of a sudden. And so I guess I'm just curious, in your experience, have you seen earnouts in deals? Have they often worked? Have they often failed? What's it like for a lot of business owners that you see having to go through this transition and integration period?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more rare. I mean, I'd be surprised if I see a third of the earnouts actually like hit anywhere at 90% to 100% of what they could be.
Yeah. Wow.
I maybe end up seeing a third of the earnouts that end up paying out virtually nothing of the earnout amount. And it's usually because the founder, to your point, they didn't deal culturally. They didn't either set things up to hand it off the reins to somebody else, or
Yep.
they did, or hey, I sold, and while they're technically at the job, they're not running the business anymore, and that's on them. And then there's that kind of other third that's in the middle. Like they do pretty well. They maybe pay out 50 to 70%. It's just to your point, like it often, even sometimes they fail, but it's like the ones that do really well, they had somebody, they either have done deals themselves or they had an expert, an advisor who has walked through a bunch of deals to help them set up things to be successful. Some cases actually in the deal terms, other cases it's just mentally that it's like, all right, what's next for you? Like we ended up when one of our the company we ended up selling to Nokia, massive exit from a public company being sold. I was kind of unfireable. And so I literally just stopped showing up to the office for like 60 days. I took like a giant multi-$100 million renewal call from like while bass fishing in Alabama. And I was just I ended up being bored out of my mind. But like I had somebody who said, look, the only way you're going to be happy on the other side is if you just completely uncheck for as long as they will let you. And so I ended up showing back up in the office at like day 61 or 62, and people were surprised. Because on the acquirer side, they were like we figured you were gone for like 90 to 100 days, like easy to kind of redo that. But we knew your mentality, you would come back. And frankly, there was money on the table. So, but that was part of kind of coaching through, like, what did I need after that massive rush? I needed like a 2-month holiday to go through like the emotional, like letting go. And then frankly, it was only maybe 30 days. And I needed about another 20 to get bored.
Yes. Yeah. That's cool. It's actually a common experience I heard from a lot of founders too. They all of a sudden more money in their accounts than they've ever had. They take some time off. But I like this concept of, I'm doing stuff, but at some point that getting bored is ultimately a driver for them to get back. And, they've always been a producer, somebody who's adding value. And I actually think there's value in getting bored, by the way. There's studies around what happens to your brain when you get bored and how it actually ignites other things and changes the way you think about stuff. So it's kind of interesting. But
I mean, I love hiking, but if you told me I had to go hiking every day for the next 1,000 days, that might be a little bit different type of thing. So
for sure. Hey, I'm just curious. It might be a little bit of an offbeat question here, but I'm obviously you're stateside. I'm in Australia. I'm curious with the companies that you've represented and the transactions you've done. Have you ever done any transactions that were sort of cross-border or outside of the US? I'm going to say outside of Canada too, because that's just a little too close and too easy. But have you had to do any sort of offshore transactions?
Only on the buy side. So like we bought a company called Mapsloot out of Germany. And so, we were already an international company. We did a couple like that. We ended up buying our way into the South Korean market as well. Had to do a joint venture in China. So I've done a couple of those, and they're all very different as well, I find, and for a whole bunch of reasons. So.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm always curious with it because I find there can be additional complexities, right? There's different laws, there's the tyranny of distance and time zones and all those sort of obvious things that that people think about. But I've had to kind of coach a lot of my clients because they'll say, oh, hey, this company in the US would be a great buyer of us. They will love what we do. And when I kind of take a look at things, like sometimes they're right. Sometimes you go, yeah, look, they're global. They've got all this stuff going on. There's a good fit. But other times it's like, yeah, look, you might do something similar to them, but they don't operate outside of the US. They don't have all these sort of other characteristics, which you go, look, for me to try to convince these people to suddenly open up and have an international strategy, we're never going to change their strategy for them. So I think sometimes I see huge opportunities in international expansion and transactions, but I also think people sometimes misunderstand some of the moving pieces and some of the complexity.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge step for. I mean, I've had the blessing of already been at the international company, so when we're going and acquiring, like we already have offices set up in every country in Europe, and so more it's like, who are you going to report to, type of thing, just structurally, like that's easier. As opposed to, now my day job is with a large international real estate company with a big technology presence, like going into other countries where they're in 20 plus countries. That's a decision for every country that goes into, because it's really setting up a new company for each one of those. And so I think you're right. I mean, there's a huge opportunity, but also if the potential acquirer does not already have, not even just an international presence, at least in your region. Like, working in the Middle East entirely different than working in Oceania. And so, when we were at this public company, they had this bright idea. We had so many company customers throughout Asia and Oceania. They're like, we need to have a headquarters in the region. So they decided, without asking any of us that had spent a lot of time, they bought space in an office building in Singapore, which is 6 to 7 hours from everywhere. So great office, love the people that are there. It didn't help any of the travel issues, any of the relationships that they were really wanting, because great, instead of having a 14-hour flight, you have a 6 to 7 hour flight. And like the board afterwards, they were like, why didn't anybody tell us? Because you didn't ask.
Yeah. Communication. There we go again. Cool. It's interesting. I just got back from the US on Sunday, so a couple of days ago, and I was at a couple of conferences all around mergers, acquisitions, that sort of stuff. And there was a part of one of the conferences where they call it the sort of deal market, where there was a lot of private equity guys set up so that intermediaries like me could go and talk to them, introduce ourselves. What kind of stuff do you guys like to buy? This is the sort of stuff we sell. Have we got a deal potentially, or should we just stay in touch? All that sort of good stuff is, wonderful networking opportunities. And being in Australia, of course, I was constantly asking people, do you do cross-border transactions? Have you, and half of them pick up and go, are you from Australia? Okay, we understand Australia. Or no, look, we don't buy businesses in your region, which is fine. But one thing that actually sort of jumped out at me, well, two things actually. One was the number of investment firms who said, yeah, we'll deal in Australia. In fact, we're working on a deal right now. I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So you are actually active in this space. So that surprised me that so many of them were looking at our region. Now, don't get me wrong, Australia, language-wise, is brilliant, culturally, very good fit with the US. Time zone is terrible, but hey, the dollar's good too. So, it can make some good buying. But I was surprised at how many of them were doing deals down here. The other aspect of it was the deal size. Traditionally, if I went back even 5 or 6 years ago, I found that for somebody to come and look at a deal in Australia, it had to be bigger for them to want to bother. And I had a lot of PE guys saying to me, hey, look, if it's a platform investment, okay, kind of 2 mil EBIT is kind of really the minimum size we'd want to look at. But hey, if we're already in that space, we'll look at anything down as low as sort of $500,000 in EBIT. And I was like, okay, well, wow, that's really far. It's a different narrative than what I think we've traditionally had. And I've just finding that landscape changing is really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, at least from my experience, that tends to always happen when the economy is slower, like we're seeing, kind of across the world is, and it's not that people are looking for scraps. It's just they're much more opportunistic because they're saying, look, I can still make a lot of money by bolting on a bunch of $500,000, EBITDA deals. And so like, that's still good money, especially if you can take it and then scale it on the other side. Where when the market's hot, like really people are like, no, like you don't have $5 million dropping to the bottom line. Sorry, I'm not interested. Because when things are plentiful, that's what people are looking for. And so I've always looked for those smaller deals because so many people pass them by. I mean, I'm happy when there is the investment available to go make the larger deals, but because I know that I'm a scaler, I'm part of a deal team. At this point in my career, I'm not leading any deals myself, although sometimes because of relationships, people will come to me and I'll hand them off to the corp dev guys. But I know I'm going to be part of taking that $500,000 EBITDA business and blowing it out to saying, hey, how do we make that a $5 to $10 million EBITDA business in 2 years? I know as long as there's investment there, like bring me those all day long, because the only decision that I'm having is the same decision I'm having about a roadmap for anything technology inside is, hey, I have all these things I could build. What's the best ROI? Well, if we buy a smaller deal, it does mean I'm not going to have to build something internal, but that may be a much better ROI than other things that are on the plate.
Yeah. No, that's really good. It's really good. But I know we're sort of probably getting close to time here, and I've got a couple of last quick questions if I could. But I am interested, like for these sort of smaller companies who do want to scale, might perhaps build for an exit, grow value in their companies. I mean, do you have any sort of high-level tips? Your top tip or your top 3 tips or something that you tell business owners to think about as they're on that journey?
Yeah, my first tip is if you, especially if you're the sole owner, you have a very small ownership group, like if you do not have experience selling, there's a place when you're ready to sell, they need to have somebody like you. But before then, to get ready to start getting the business worth something, to start thinking about that, like that's a time to bring on at least an advisory board that you give equity to, somebody that has experience, that have done the deals, but they have also have the experience of helping your business get through the inflection point you're trying. Because even if you don't sell, they're going to help you get through that inflection point. They're more than worth anything you give them. And then on the other side, hey, they're going to talk to you in a way that like the friends that have been around you on the journey so far aren't. And so in my experience, it makes then the conversation with somebody like you and your team so much easier, because you now at that point have 12 to 36 months of taking outside counsel from usually not just one. It should be like 3 to 5 people that you give a little bit of equity to, some upside that's meaningful to them. And then you start actually listening to them as somebody that you're paying, because you are. It makes every other discussion so much easier. Plus, a lot of us know homes for you, perhaps. And so, I tend to get very passionate. So like if I come in as an advisor, well, guess what? If I don't know your business directly, I'm going to end up just making friends in the space very quickly because I'm passionate about it.
Yeah. It's so important, isn't it? Just that intrinsic motivator and driver. It's that's cool. My last question, I'm going to defer it in a second just because I'll jump to it, but I'd like to understand your definition, your personal definition of success. As a guy who's done a lot of different stuff in your life and obviously achieved great successes, and for yourself, for other people, I'm always sort of curious how our definitions and views on success evolve. Before I get you to answer that, though, Kurt, are you happy for people to reach out and connect with you? Like, what's the best way for people to get in touch if they'd like to chat to you further?
Yeah, if you want to see what I'm actually doing by day, I work for exprealty.com or EXP Realty, and so that big international real estate company. But I do a ton of writing. My personal website is kurtuhlir.com. I'm actually writing a lot, and kind of leads in the next your question is like, I'm spending a lot of time writing about high achieving servant leadership, different styles, what I wish I would have known before. And so that's the best way to reach out to me. I love actually talking to people, and they go, hey, you mentioned this and I disagree with it in an article, or you didn't cover these topics. What do you think about it? And it's like, That's actually what I was writing
Yeah.
this morning, was 2 articles based on questions like that from people.
Yeah, nice. Well, look, that's awesome. Well, look, I'm going to put some links in the show notes. It's clear to me that you can add so much value here to business owners who are looking to grow and achieve the type of success that you've seen in so many companies. So, for those listening, you want to reach out. There'll be some links in the notes here. Kurt, are you on? You're on LinkedIn, right? Is it okay for people to reach out and connect there as well?
Yeah, LinkedIn's great as well. So, I mean, my definition of success is I've worked for so many toxic leaders before. I've been that toxic leader. I've made people, multimillionaires, and some of them still won't return my phone call today. And so I'm really my definition of success is how do I raise my family, but how do I multiply good, healthy servant leadership in others? And so every person that I can kind of help on that journey, I think makes the world a better place.
Yeah, totally agree. Kurt, thanks so much for making the time, buddy. It's been really lovely chatting to you, and you've been gracious in sharing your story and your tips, and I know that people will get a lot of value out of it. So thanks for making the time to come on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Simon.
Awesome. And thank you to all for joining us again on the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, and please join us on the next episode, which will be coming out in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks for coming.